This is not transmitted by the air. There's no risk to a person in this hospital who's walking or is a patient.
It's apparent that political correctness has taken deep root in this country. If the Fox News channel didn't exist, the traditional conservative voice would be buried in the media.
Everything is coming through that border, Brian. And when I say everything, I'm talking about terror at its worst level.
But it's not just terrorists, and it doesn't matter how secure the Mexican border is. If someone can enter the U.S. as a tourist, student, or businessman and simply never leave.
What they're doing is they want to blend in. And it doesn't take a lot for Mohammed to transform himself into Miguel.
What if, instead of gun-free zones, we had gun-required zones?
If we replaced the video game controller in every kid's hand with an AR-15, America would be a better place.
And we should be clear for our viewers that their assault weapon is a made-up term, and there really is no such thing as an assault weapon.
In the Middle Ages, it was witchcraft. You would attribute adverse weather events to witchcraft. Now it's just now we just have CO2.
Global warming, David, is simply socialism in drag.
The demonization of carbon dioxide is just like the demonization of the poor Jews under Hitler. Carbon dioxide is actually a benefit to the world, and so were the Jews.
It's not a let's hunt down the black people today.
Is it time to profile?
Give me evidence that this is a racial case. Give me any evidence that this is about race.
There's too much in the minority culture, the embrace of the thug ethic.
You might be tired of hearing that 72% of black babies are born out of wedlock. I know I'm tired of hearing it.
Is this the smoking gun on Benghazi?
Is Islam a destructive force?
The likelihood that this one case will lead to an epidemic in Dallas or in Texas is very remote, close to zero.
Media has changed in a big way in the last 15 years. The internet era has shifted the focus from network news, newspapers, and magazines to online content. Especially broadcasters seem to be tripping over themselves to capture consumer focus, with everything from toilet problems on cruise ships to airplanes lost at sea. Take a look at the information from the Pew Research Center. The State of the Media reports they just issued says that 6.4 of all newspaper jobs were eliminated in 2012. Online media sites, of which there are 30, have added 5,000 jobs in the last 6 years alone. CNN, Fox, and MSNBC lost about 3 million primetime viewers.
CNN and MSNBC took a hell of a hit in the ratings, so much so that, yes, the Weather Channel beat them for their morning ratings.
The likelihood that this one case will lead to an epidemic in Dallas or in Texas is very remote, close to zero.
Obviously, those viewers are going somewhere, and we could go on and on about these numbers, revenue losses, and so on, but let's do something more fun. Let's look at what media companies are doing to keep your attention on that television screen, or the computer screen, or that mobile device.
Could the plane go missing if it collided with some other smaller jet way up in the sky? Of course it could, but another plane would be missing too. Can you get something like that out of a plane like the 777?
Could deadly battery fumes or an oxygen shortage have actually turned Flight 370 into what some are calling a zombie plane?
I know that at least 10 ISIS fighters have been caught coming across the Mexican border in Texas. There's nobody talking about it. Because I've asked the Border Patrol, Greta.
And the Border Patrol, they just let ISIS members come across the border?
No, they caught them at the border. Therefore, we know that ISIS is coming across the border. And if they catch 5 or 10 of them, then you know there's going to be dozens more that did not get caught by the Border Patrol.
A terrifying warning about a toy your child might be wearing right now. These bracelets could cause cancer.
A new terror threat coming that could kill millions of Americans through our power grid.
We're in this moment right now where journalism is very much under attack. You had the seizure of the Associated Press's phone records of the team of reporters that were investigating the CIA and the drone program. You have President Obama has intervened to keep a Yemeni journalist in prison whose only crime seems to have been exposing a U.S. missile strike. And then, in my own case, I was working on one of my early stories on the Joint Special Operations Command on JSOC, and I get this call out of the blue from an aide to the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the senior military advisor to the President of the United States, telling me that if I published my story, I was going to be on thin ice, and he wouldn't tell me how he got my phone number or how he heard about the story.
Fukushima it's the largest nuclear meltdown in the history of our species, with 500,000 tons of contaminated water already collected. But it's been forgotten about by the mainstream media, and that water continues to leak into the Pacific Ocean. There is roughly $32 trillion in offshore tax havens put there by the 1% in order to avoid supporting the society that made them rich. Most estimates say that to end global poverty forever would take $3 trillion. So we could end it 10 times over with just the amount of money hidden offshore by financial terrorists.
Control says it has confirmed the first case of Ebola here in the United States. The patient is in isolation at a hospital in the Dallas, Texas area.
All right, give it to me straight. How big a bed do I need to hide under?
This is not transmitted by the air. There's no risk to a person in this hospital who's walking or is a patient.
The likelihood that this one case will lead to an epidemic in Dallas or in Texas is very remote, close to zero.
Look! The problem's under control. Could someone tell that, though, to the news? Because here's how they started the day today.
Good morning, America. Breaking news, Ebola in America. The first case of the deadly disease diagnosed on U.S. soil, a major American city on high alert.
They've drunk so much doomsday juice, they're even projecting panic onto people who are not panicking.
This morning, a frantic community searching for anyone who may have come in direct contact with the Ebola patient.
It's almost like they're crossing their fingers for an outbreak.
I had to do something. If not me, then who? I said, this needs to be fixed.
I thought about various investigative reporters that I would try and contact.
Once I put the phone down, I was pretty confident that my life would never be quite the same.
I mean, at the end of the day, right, when you make a decision like this, if you're not prepared to have the worst happen, then really don't do it at all.
These people face a terrifying situation.
Thomas Drake accused of leaking classified information. Agents raiding his home in Howard County.
18 agents, some of them in body armor, had been banging on our front door.
Anytime anyone takes a step like that, you know that they've probably got something important to say, because they're basically wiping away their career.
There are close to 1 million people who have top secret clearance.
The Obama administration had cracked down on whistleblowers.
They have indicted more people for violating secrecy than all of the previous administrations put together.
The number of people who indicated to us they wish they could talk, but they can't because they're so afraid of what could happen to them is a terrible thing for our democracy.
So speaking truth to power is now a criminal act.
I'm fascinated by a question, and I know I'm not the only one. And that question is, what should economies be aimed at? Well, I studied economics at university 20 years ago, and we never actually asked that question, even though it seems like a very fundamental one, because the answer was a given. It was economic growth. Over the past years, though, economic growth has had a good ride. Since 1970, it's quadrupled. And if you believe mainstream predictions, it's set to quadruple again by 2050 on the global scale. So economic growth has been doing very nicely in the long-term big picture. And yet, there are some things that we fundamentally care about that aren't coming along with it. And there are three I want to highlight. One, deprivation. Secondly, degradation. And thirdly, inequality. More and more social commentators are talking about the rise of inequality and the importance of tackling it. 2/3 of the world's population today live in countries that are now more unequal than they were in 1980. And just taking one country as an example, in 2010, the top richest 10% of people in the United States captured 93% of the increase in national income that year. So inequality is really quite extraordinarily at the heart of the way economies are growing. Our politicians know it. We're hung up on talking about economic growth, but because they know that we need more than this one lever doesn't really capture everything we care about, they're increasingly trying to qualify what they're calling for with extra terms. So Merkel has called for sustainable growth, David Cameron for balanced growth, Barack Obama for long-term lasting growth. Barroso wants the EU to have smart, sustainable, inclusive and resilient growth. And all these terms, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm walking into a New York deli bar. You know, so many different terms are being added to this idea. It's clear that we want something more than growth. The fact that we want something more than growth, though, shouldn't seem like news, because when the very idea of national income and its growth was conceived, its inventor warned us that we needed something more than that. In 1934, when Simon Kuznets wrote the first report to the US Congress describing how you could measure national income, he said that the wealth of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measure of its national income. He gave us that caveat on day one. And no wonder our politicians are searching, grasping for the language that they need to describe where we're trying to go, because growth isn't enough as an idea of what we're trying to achieve. What if instead of starting with economic growth, we start with the fundamentals of what we care about, everybody meeting their human rights, living within the means of this planet, and then we ask, what kind of economic system would help to take us there? One thing is true, we need to widen our concept of what economic development is, far beyond growth alone. So we need to think about investing in the wealth that sustains us, the human wealth, the natural wealth, and the social wealth, because it's from these that everything that we generate in our economy flows.